Hi and welcome to Philosophy with Phil, with me, Phil Cohen. For this video I wanted to talk about the Jewish attitude towards sin, and we'll also cover the concept of Satan, Soton. I'll start by saying that I know I've done a video on justice, which kind of talks about this and how sin and how we represents a sort of wedge in our relationship between God and ourselves and God, as well as our relationship with God, with ourselves and our fellow man. I also had a video on Rosh Hashanah where we talked about different types of sin. Here, I wanted to talk about the Jewish attitude towards sin. We see sin as being a mistake, a slip. The word I've used previously is chait for sin, the famous word, which actually means like an archer who misses the target on a shot. The Gemara tells us that when one sins, it's a momentary lapse of intellect. It's a moment of folly. It even describes it as madness, because if one were to fully appreciate the consequences, both physically and spiritually, that sin does to our relationship to God and to our fellow human beings, then one wouldn't dream of sinning. Which leads me on to the next question: is man inherently evil? And the answer is, well, yes and no. As we've said previously on videos about freedom and about free will, we have these opposite drives, these polar opposite drives. One that tries to raise us up and to bring us closer to God, what we call the Yetzer Tov, a good inclination, the good aspirations. But we also have these inclinations to do sin, to sort of draw us down to our selfish, animalistic desires. Before Eden, before the creation of these goes back to the Garden of Eden, when Adam ate from the tree of knowledge. Before that, sin, or the desire to sin, was an external force, as represented by the snake. Whereas after he sinned, after he ate from the tree, he internalized that desire, and it got muddled in with his Yetzer Tov, and that created Rotzon, that created free will, Bechira as we call it in Hebrew, and so he had these two polar opposite forces within him. So if I can just repeat and reiterate that the idea of sin is often compared to a stain or a blemish or some sort of misgiving. Don't forget, in Hebrew we don't have a name for someone who has performed a particular kind of sin, really. There's some exceptions. Sometimes with idolatry, we say we can describe someone who breaks Shabbos maybe. But we talk about someone who is Baal the sin, who is someone who has done the sin. It's not like that sin is internalized into them and become part of their psyche, their consciousness. It's just something that they've done. It's what kind of irks me when you get into discussions about homosexuality. It's like we can define someone based on who they sleep with, which isn't a Jewish attitude to take. We are who we are, and what we do is what we do, and those things are separate from each other. If I can now, so the attitude towards sin is like a mistake. In summary, I also said I wanted to talk about the concept of Soton, Satan, also known as the angel of death, also called in Hebrew the Yetzer Hara, which is, as I said earlier, that drive to sort of towards more animalistic, selfish desires. Anything that pulls us away from God, basically, falls under this category. the famous story is told in the Zohar, in part two of the Zohar, the second edition of the Zohar, section 163. The story of the harlot and the prince, where the king has a son who's causing him a little bit of a concern, so he hires a beautiful prostitute to try and seduce the child, the son, the prince, and test his chastity. Now the story doesn't end, like many of the great mystical stories, but that's our sort of struggle with our evil inclination, if you like, with Soton. The word Soton literally means adversary. And it also highlights the paradox here, because let's not forget that the Soton is an angel and is sent on a mission by God. And the story in the Zohar, the way the Zohar tells the story about the harlot, is that she is very reluctant and she feels very torn. On the one hand, she wants to perform the will of the king, but on the other hand, she wants the prince to pass the test, if you like, and not be seduced by her wooing. So the one myth I want to bust is the idea of the Soton being some kind of monster. There's a lot of, we see the pictures of the devil with the horns and the spiky tail and the pitchfork and everything. The Soton is a lot scarier than that. Much scarier than that. If you remember horror films from when you were a kid and you watch them now and you see these great monsters, it's actually quite funny. I remember when I was a student looking at horror films and comedy films and seeing that there was quite a considerable overlap between the two. For example, I don't know, the Omen films, if you've seen them, about a boy around whom he has supernatural powers and lots of people start dying around him. Well, the way in which they die is fairly similar to what you'd see on like a Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner cartoon. And yet we laugh at the coyote, but the horror film's supposed to scare us. Why is that? Anyway, back to the point. The Soton isn't a monster. In some ways, he dresses himself up as our best friend. The Chofetz Chaim, though, is the one who paints the Soton as being a rabbi, as being a very learned person, who spends day and night studying Torah, to find ways to outsmart us, to trip us up, to use our own logic against us. He's, for every minute, every second, every hour that we spend learning, he's been learning as well. But as the Chofetz Chaim said, he got up earlier than you did. And he's going to stay up later than you did. Because he's looking for ways, just like the prostitute in the story, he's looking for ways to trip us up. To find excuses. To find extenuating circumstances. To find ways that he can make you do what he wants to do, to manipulate you. It's a difficult situation. You can do it just this once. Nobody's watching. Nobody will mind. I'm sure people will understand. All of these excuses are excuses that he's got in his portfolio of existing excuses that have worked in the past. And he spends day and night trying to learn more and more and more to do his job. Which, let's not forget, like in the story, is the job that he's been given to do. However reluctantly he is to do it. That's what he has to do. So, the Soton isn't that sort of scary monster that makes us all laugh. He's far more fearsome. Something we have to be on our guard to outsmart. And by learning Torah ourselves and keeping up and trying to keep ahead of him, we can do our bit to make sure he plays less and less a part in our lives, and that our motives are purer and more lofty and less self-centered. Shabbat Shalom, and thanks for watching.